Okay, well, let's get started with our insight session today. Thanks very much for attending. Appreciate you taking the time. My name's Paul Dorsett, obviously with Sylvan Software. I oversee our services and support group, as well as doing some insight classes. So today's session is about basic view building, Stratum View Building 101. And some of the things we'll be talking about today, we'll be using the current version of Stratum, which is 7.3. It may look a little bit different than what you're used to using, depending on obviously the release level that you're at. So we'll go through the home page. It looks a little bit different, a little more easy to use, and has a lot of good information on it. And then we'll get right into how do you build a view? What are some of the basic steps and the basic components that you can use when you create a view? So we'll talk about things like dimensions and measures, and then how we work with time in those views themselves. We'll look at some basic navigation, i.e. how do you drill around in a view? Once you've defined your dimensions, how do you drill down into more information? And look at some sorting and some filtering options so that you can kind of tailor your view to get to the information that you want to look at and analyze. And then depending on time, we'll look at maybe some other stuff that's available within Viewer, and also open it up to any questions, either on this material that we're going to go through today, or other aspects of Viewer that you may have a question about. With that said, let me, excuse me, switch over to our environment. Now this is, again, this is version 7.3. A little bit different look and feel. Contains basically all the same type of information that you might, if you're familiar with Viewer and have been using Viewer up to this point. If you're not at version 7.2, actually, your screen, your homepage is going to look a little bit different. Over on the left-hand side is what we call the left frame or the left panel. And this is the area in Viewer where you have access to your views or your reports. Again, a little bit different. Prior to this release, we had what we called the favorites and recents window that you could pop up and select a view from that window. We've changed the paradigm a little bit, and now we've got some icons that allow you to look at the different views that you have either designated as a favorite, and I will show you how to do that a little bit later. Recents, these are views that you've run recently. We tracked last 25, 30 views that you've run and basically put them into different time categories this week, last week, beyond that. And then the last icon at the top brings you back to all of the view groups and views that you currently have access to just based on your security and your authorization. Each of these that have the little down arrow is what we call a view group. And within a view group, then you have views. So these are individual views that have been created and they live in this particular view group. A view can live in multiple view groups as well. For some additional information, particularly as it pertains to help documentation, online resources, if you go up to this icon to the very right-hand side and help, this gives you a lot of good information, not only for the online help, but you can also get into a number of the video resources that we've put together over time. Had basically a set that allows you to display learning the basics of how do you get started using Viewer. So again, a lot of good information. If you hover over on this icon and select the help. All right, so that's kind of a basic look at the homepage. The inside content here gets you into, obviously, the insight classes that we have scheduled coming up. We have a customer forum that allows you to exchange information between not only us here at Sylvan, but it's also open for other users of Viewer Stratum to also make questions or comments as well. And then some other interesting information that we just provide pertaining both to Sylvan and Viewer Stratum, but also industry type information as well. Okay, so let's start talking about a view. Again, views live in view groups. You can actually designate a view that you create to be in multiple view groups. Just a word of warning there is there's a single view. If you make modifications to that view, regardless of which view group it's in and you run it from, it's going to be showing those changes. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new view. And the way to do that is to highlight the view group that you'd like that view to reside in. And then right click. And you've got an option, actually the only option is to create a new view. What that will do is Viewer will start up. A couple things you notice, obviously, creating a new view, so we haven't identified any of the dimensions, measures, time that we'd like on that view. A view is broken up into rows and columns. And then a third component is what we call a view filter. And that basically allows you to filter the data in the view based on those, and it can be multiple dimensions and values within a dimension. On the right-hand side is what we call the View Explorer. And the View Explorer really gives you all the information about this particular view. We're not going to get into all of the different properties, but each of these components at the row, the column, the measure level, even charting, they all have different properties, just depending on what kind of view or what kind of entity it is. So a measure like quantity or cost or dollars will have certain properties associated with them. So the first thing we want to do is we want to add our dimensions. Easiest way to do that is just to click on this plus sign on the axis that you want to add this dimension to. And what that'll do is it'll bring up a window of all of what we call hierarchies, dimensions, same thing. But this lists all of the different dimensions that I have access to within my environment. And I'm able to add by simply selecting the different ones I'd like to see in my view. So I selected company, we'll go to sold to, we'll come down and let's see, item products, and we'll select product. Once I've selected those, I can go ahead and say okay. And then we'll show those items, or those dimensions in this case, that you selected. And you're going to see a whole list of these. These are just the different values that we have within our Stratum environment right now. Now I could do the same thing with columns as well. I could select dimensions there. If I decide, well, I want to add another dimension. Maybe I want to go down to a ship to level. I can go ahead and just click on that as well. We'll go up to customer ship to. There it is. And go ahead and select that. And that'll just add it to my list. And what you'll see when you do that, especially if you've got an existing view and you come in and you run it and you want to add a new dimension, it's going to add that new dimension after whatever is currently being displayed on the view. The thought logic there is if you went to go select another dimension, that's probably the one you want to drill to next. So we put that new dimension into the area immediately following the currently visible view. Now, if I decide I want to change these things around, we have these little gripper icons, little dots. As long as you hover over that, left mouse click, you can move that around. And you can just drop it on the dimension that you want to move that over to. Okay, so that's dimensions. If we look at the next component is measures. And again, measures are things, those are the numbers. Those are dollars, cost, quantity, freight charges, discount amount. However, you've got it defined within Stratum. A couple ways that you can add those. Probably the easiest is just right-click anywhere on the white space, and you'll see an add. Make a distinction here. Add refers to measures. As you can see, we can add a regular measure, which is one that we store in the database, and a calculated measure, which, as its name implies, is a calculation or an expression that we can add to the view. Edit is another way that you could add dimensions to rows and columns. I find it just really easy to click on that plus sign up here. But for measures, I can do a regular measure. The other option that you have is this 1, 2, 3 icon. I can hover over this, and I can also say add. So this is a newer feature that we added a few releases ago. The right click, add, for lack of a better word, that's kind of a legacy way of doing it. So let's go to the new way here. Let's go ahead and click on this, and just hovering over this, I can go right to the add. And I want to add a regular measure. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring up all the measures that I have access to. I'm running in a demo environment. I have access to everything. But I can also filter and say, well, I want to look at all the measures that either start or contain with the word actual. I can go ahead and say find. So here are all of my measures associated with a category called actual sales. So I might want to click and select the amount. Now for these kinds of views, we have what we call time range. So a time range allows you to then designate within the view itself what time frame do you want this column of data to correspond to. And depending on the category, so in this case it's sales, we're tracking sales in this environment down to a daily basis. But I could select any of the different time units that are associated with this category. So I could look at this data calendar months. I could do it based on my fiscal month, I could do it quarters, however the different time units I have available. I'm going to switch this over to months. And now that I selected that, I can then select my from and to year. So in this particular case, what I want to show is, I'm going to select from year being the current year and select current month as my starting point, and do the same thing on the to And what's nice about using these relative time periods is as time moves on, we get to a new year or we get to the new month, you don't have to go in and change anything in the view. It's going to recognize the fact that we're not in October anymore, we're now in November, or we've gone from 2021, 2022. Once I've selected that, I've got a couple options. I can go ahead and say add. That'll add that particular entry to the view. And as you can see over in my View Explorer on the right-hand side, I now have that measure in my view. I can then go back in and say, I want to add another measure. So the window stays up for it. I can also add the same measure, but with a different time range. So I added current year, current month. Maybe I want to do current year, January through current month. So I've got a year to date value for my actual sales. Again, I can say, go ahead and add that one. And that adds that as well. So I can do this adding units, adding costs. I can add a different measure from a different category if I wanted to, whatever makes sense for the view that you're trying to create. And again, as I go through and I add my measures, once I'm done, just a word of caution, if I say okay here, what it'll do is it'll add this measure that I've got highlighted and then exit the screen. No big deal. I can always go back and remove that measure. But after you've done it 2 or 3 times, you'll remember that once I'm done, I've added my measures, I can just go ahead and say exit. There we go. So now here's my view, pretty simple view. I've got current year, current month. We're a little bit behind the times in terms of our time ranges, but current is September of 2017. And then I have a year-to-date figure as well. It's as simple as that. I can go and now navigate through this particular view. But one of the things, as you're going through and you're building a view, what you'll want to do is you want to save that view. And that's where these icons over here at the top, little floppy disks of all things, that's going to save the view. Okay. Once I save the view is going to appear in the view group that I selected. And there it is. Now I could have done a save as and changed the name, which is probably a good thing to do. I can also go over into the View Explorer and highlight the item I want to look at the properties for and change that as well. Go ahead and say, apply that change that I made, and now go ahead and save it. And if I go back over in my view, there's my view. So now when I go back and either go to the home page, do something else, or I want to come back tomorrow and look at the results in my view, everything that I've done in the view, however I've saved the view, that's how the view is going to appear the next day, or the next time you run the view, rather. So overnight, the data has been updated. You can update the data as well during the day. But this is how it'll appear. Any changes that you've made will appear. So now that I have my view, my basic view, I can now drill. So I can drill into company 100, and if I hover over that, it's going to show me that I'm going to drill now to the customer sold to dimension. That's because that's the dimension that is next in my list on my rows. So I can go ahead and click on that. It appears, all the customer sold tos appear. And I can do the same thing. I can take Midwest providers. It's going to now go down to the ship to level. Okay. From a navigation standpoint, I can drill back, if you will, by clicking on the heading. So if I want to see all my sold tos again, just click on that. Now I'm not restricted at all in how I drill. Again, I could say, well, I want to go from sold to right to product. A couple ways I can do that. Again, I can drag this guy, this dimension over. It'll rearrange the order that those dimensions are in. So now as I drill, it's going to say I'm going to go down to product. So I've got all my products. Have some other what we call attributes as well. Drill back up. The other thing that I can do is not only can I drag this guy, this dimension around on the navigation panel, but I can also drag and drop it on a specific value, in this case for pin brands, and it'll do the same thing. Did I get the right one there? Product, there we go. That's better. So again, I've got control of how I want to navigate through my view. Okay. Again, if I save the view this way, I'm going to go ahead and save it. I can go back to the home page. And now when I run that view, well, let's look at recents. So I recently ran that new view I created. And again, the fact that I saved the view in this expanded view, if you will, where I drilled from company to sold to product, I saved it that way. That's the way it's going to appear. Okay. All right. I'm going to change the view around a little bit. Let's make sold to the first dimension that we want to look at. A few things we can do here. We can very easily sort based on a measure. So for example, maybe I want to list year-to-date sales top to bottom. Way to do that is just right click on that heading, and you're going to see a lot of different options that you can pick from. We're going to take sort right now and say descending. A couple things happen. The data gets sorted, descending, and we get a little icon that shows us that as well. And the icon is active, if you will. If I click on it, it's going to switch the sort over. So if I'm doing descending, it's going to go to ascending. Flip it back. Again, I can save it that way. The other thing I can filter on is not only measures or the numbers, but I can also filter on dimension values. And a way to do that, and I'll also show you a different way you can sort using the measures, is this icon here. So we use this funnel as kind of the universal icon that we have for filtering. So if I click on that, what this shows you is all of the different components, whether it's a dimension, whether it's a measure or a data item. Updates available, always good to know. Or a more, I want to call it extensive way of filtering via values on the axes, so whether it's a row or a column. But let's just look at, well, let's go back and look at data as an example. If I click on data, I can filter on any of the measure items that I have available on my view. So I can say here, since these are measures, numbers, we have kind of the classic type of operations. I want to see something greater than or less than. I can show the top 5 values in this view based on this measure. I'm going to show everything right now, just very simple. Anything over 10 million. Okay, go ahead and set that. And now in the view filter, I see that as being selected. So if I go ahead and say okay here, well, that's because I did it on the wrong one. There you go. So I'm going to go back, and I'm not going to do it because I didn't have sales in any 1 month greater than 10 million. So I'm going to cancel that, and I'm going to put it on the measure that I was intending to putting on. And 10 million there. Now say okay. Do I select? Oh, I said it helps if I select the right thing. There we go. All right. So these are all the sold tos with year-to-date sales greater than $10 million. Now I can do the same thing in this filter, but do it against the levels or the dimensions. So maybe there's only certain products or certain customers that I wanted this information for. So I'm going to be choosy about my sold tos. So I'm going to hit the filter icon and say, well, I only want ones that have food in the description. Now, what's nice about filtering on dimensions, any attributes, things like descriptions, or any of the other attributes that are associated with that dimension. For example, for customers, you got address information, city, state, that kind of thing. I can filter based on that. I'm going to select just the name. Go ahead and click the search button. And these are all the customers that I have defined within our database that have food somewhere in the description. Now I can select everybody out of that group, or maybe I just want to highlight a couple of them. Once I make those selections, I can go ahead and say, okay. And as you can see, now I've got my values that I'm selecting for. The other thing, and it's new to version 7.2.7.3, certainly 7.2, is this include exclude. So now if I've got tens of thousands of customers or whatever, and I want a list, but I don't want to include X number of customers, I can select those customers and say exclude, as opposed to having to select all of the customers minus those few that I don't want to include. So very handy feature that we added. So I'm going to go ahead and include that. The other thing I'm going to do just right now, so we make sure we get the data back, is I'm going to remove that filter that I had on the data. So I want to make sure that, there's a good chance that those that I selected didn't have year-to-date sales over $10 million. The way to do that is at the very top, there's a null or a blank operator. Go ahead and select that. The other way I could do that is go ahead and just click on this X. Go ahead and say, okay. Now, these are the 3 customers that I selected out of that group. A couple more things, and then we'll open it up to some questions. Again, I talked about regular measures, those that are stored in the database directly, and also calculated measures. I can add a calculated measure similar to what I did with a regular measure. I just highlight the 1, 2, 3 window, measure window, and say, go ahead and add a calculated measure. A few things we can add here. I can say this is a calculation. I can give it whatever caption I want. I can give it a format or a display string. And this is another new feature that you have available for a regular column or a calculated column, is do you want to give this particular column, do you want to highlight it somehow with column coloring? And I don't know, I'll pick something like that. Below is where we can now do our calculation. I'm just going to show something very simple. Let's see, I don't know. We'll take this year-to-date sales. Just click on that. I'm going to subtract the current month. And that basically gives me previous year-to-date. And go ahead and say okay. And now I've got my new column. And again, I could call this something more appropriate, but I'm going to call it a calculation. So this coloring of columns you can do on any type of column, whether it's regular or calculated. It's just a really nice way, especially if you have a lot of columns, to be able to distinguish things like actuals versus budget, or current month, previous month, year to date. Just very easy way for users or yourself to be able to very quickly look at the view and understand, well, this is year to date versus these, are current month type thing. Again, anytime you make a change, make sure you go back and save that. If that's really what you want to save. Again, because this is the way it'll appear the next time we bring up the view. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the lines if you want to unmute yourself. And if you have any questions, that would be great. Try to answer those.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
When it comes to the area of the rows and the columns and you want to add the hierarchies, are those hierarchies like the highest level of hierarchies, or are you able to, there's still other levels in there that you can drill down to that are not being shown?
Yes. So in a I guess classic textbook definition of a hierarchy, you have multiple levels. So you've got like dimension, hierarchy, and then a level. Within viewer, we just have the one level, whether we call it a dimension or a hierarchy. So for like sold to, well, for like level, maybe it's you have customer, might be a classic dimension. And you might then be able to drill into a parent and then a sold to and a shipped to. We break those all out. So as you can see here, we've got sold to as a separate dimension, and then dimension shipped to as a separate dimension. So they act independently. Now the only exception to that is what we do with time. And this particular view is a time range view. So I specified my starting and my ending time range. Let me very quickly create a new view. There we go. Say new. And so a time range is what we use as our standard and our default. It's just very easy for users to then be able to do calculated columns and things like that. But a non-time range view is also useful for when I want to do trending of things over time. So I might want to see, yearly information and then pick a year and drill into months. And that's where we get into two levels of a hierarchy. So when I create a view that I want to see that hierarchy of time, I can highlight the measure items in my View Explorer, And instead of the default of time range yes, I can say no. And now when I add my dimensions, what we're going to see is not only the dimensions we saw before. Now I'm just going to pick, let's pick customer sold to again. If I scroll down, what I'm also going to see now are things related to time. Most particularly these guys down here. And as we'll see, if I select on some of these, and these are all based, what's available here is based on how time is defined in your environment. So if I've got, in ours, we go down to a daily basis, but we also take those days and roll them up to months and fiscal months and things like that. So all of those time-related attributes are now available when I create the view. So I'm going to go ahead and just select those 2 dimensions. And I'm actually going to drop, and I'm going to take year, months, and pull it down to columns. But as you see, when I click on year, it's going to bring both of those because this year, months dimension is a multi-level dimension. Let me add a measure real quick. Let me do it. Units, go ahead and add that. So as you can see, now it's the columns now don't have a time range. I've just brought in my year, months dimension, time dimension into the columns, and that's what's showing across. And if I click on one of these years, it's now going to go to automatically down to months. So long-winded explanation, but for time dimensions, yes, you do have multiple levels, really just 2. For non-time dimensions, you just have the single. We break out any kind of the classic multi-level hierarchy into individual dimensions. That help answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Other items, other questions? Okay, well, I won't keep you much longer. Just a couple things. Again, there's a lot of resources available, both within Stratum. And if you can't find it and you still have a question, or even if you have a question, you want to come direct to us, please do that. customernet.sylvan.com. Just reach out to us. I'm more than happy to address any questions that you do have.